Paul here from My Perfect Failure, helping you turn your failures into successes and your setbacks into opportunities. What if the biggest thing holding you back isn't reality, but the story you've been telling yourself? In this episode of My Perfect Failure, I'm joined by Susan Britton, a former music therapist turned founder, president of the Academies Neuroscience Coaching, who helps people challenge the narrative that keep them stuck. Amongst other things, we dive into the concept of the uncertainty gap, why we create stories that limit us, and how rewiring our brains can help us pivot careers, embrace change, and finally step into the life we truly want and desire. This conversation blew my mind. It's not every day you learn how neuroscience and curiosity can completely change our futures. So if you're ready to break free from your old stories and write a new one, press play wherever you get your podcasts.
Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today, I'm super excited because I have another amazing guest for you. So my guest today is the founder and president of the Academies for Neuroscience Coaching, Inc. 25 years of leadership in coaching and coaching education has supported thousands of coaches across 6 continents to earn their INSEAD accreditation and grow the movement of neuro-informed coaches who are changing minds for good. She specializes in career and leadership coaching, weaving together her passions for coaching, neuroscience, and psychodynamic approaches to change. She is the author of 7 career and job search books and holds an executive master's in change degree from INSEAD and a bachelor's of music degree. With her small town farm girl roots to global leader for change, she brings compassion, curiosity, and collaboration to shaping the future of coaching and coach approach leaders. So a very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Susan Britton. How are you, Susan?
I am delighted to get to be here with you across the globe. Thank you, Paul.
I know, I'm delighted to have you here. I was fascinating. So thank you to Dominic Mass, who was the conduit. She's made this happen, who's amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dominic. And you know what? As I was reading your bio, I guess I got this from when we spoke initially. So I'd never considered that blend of coaching and neuroscience. So I'm excited to dive into that because I think it's quite a unique blend, and it's something that I haven't been accustomed to. So I'm fascinated to capture how that works and how it blends together, and obviously the wonderful work you're doing teaching coaches around the world. But I thought where is a good place to start is kind of at the beginning about Susan. So I also mentioned in the bio that you originally, so your background, although you coach leaders all over the world, your background, I guess, is slightly different. You were raised on a farm, so it'd be fascinating to capture what your early years were like.
Sure. I smile because I was raised in a teeny tiny little farming town in Central California, population about 2,000. And I grew up with tractors and going out when I was a little kid and actually picking cotton. And boy, you can really poke yourself getting when you're picking cotton. It is not easy. I fell in ditches. I just did all sorts of things. I rode horses, did all of those things that you do, kind of that you would think on a farm. That wasn't your traditional farm. When I say Central California, they don't farm in 60-acre plots out there. They farm in 10,000 and 20,000 acre plots. So it was a big operation. But it was still a very rural, homogenous sort of experience growing up. And I noticed when I was growing up that I was sort of always, I'll just say it, that the phrase, the odd person out, odd man out, because I was the first one to notice when people were upset or notice people's emotions or be very sensitive to relational things that were happening, which is a different world from farming, because farming really, lives and breathes and dies on what's the weather going to be? What needs to happen to the crops? Do you need to spray for bugs? Do you need to irrigate? Do you need to plant? Do you need to harvest? It is so sort of externally focused and has to be for a good reason. So I felt like I was just a little bit not quite understood when I was growing up, because I had this really sensitive piece of me that was kind of curious about people and relationships and emotions. So that was my early experience. My mother, God bless her, she actually chose my college major. So I'm kind of fast forwarding from being a little kid, building forts out of sticks and things like that, and trees that were down. But from that to college, I had been a musician all throughout my junior high school years, and a very good musician at that. And my mom was smart enough to see that music interest and also the sensitivity and the relationship and the interest in behavior in me. And she suggested, Susan, why don't you major in music therapy in college? And so I did. And it was a great combination for me, because I was able to really start then putting more science and psychological background behind some of the things that I just noticed and been curious about for all of my growing up life.
Your mum was incredibly perceptive.
Yeah. I really credit her with that. And the two of us are very different. She's got much more of that external focus and the details and that sort of thing. And also is a deeply relational person, but it was a different kind of thing growing up. And so even more credit I want to give to her, because that's not necessarily her first interest. And I have another story about how that your own interests can influence what you want for your children very deeply. Yeah.
So what's interesting, there's a couple of things that are interesting. Actually, I wanted to ask you a curious question. So music obviously was a great love for you at a young age, and you were good at that. What were you playing a particular instrument?
So flute was my major instrument. I also played piano. And then when I went to a conservatory of music for my degree, then you had to learn all of the major groups. So I had to learn strings, percussion, brass, woodwinds. So every semester I got to learn a new instrument, and of course choral, vocal. So yeah, I got the whole.
Wow. And you enjoyed that, clearly.
Oh, very much. Yeah. I performed even then throughout my adulthood. Had a very good friend who was a harpist, and we would do flute music at weddings and funerals and all sorts of things. She was fantastic. She even recorded for the Star Wars music on harp. So we were just magic together, because we got to improvise and just really had a fun time getting to.
Amazing. Did you ever? So I guess I'm thinking about me here. So yeah. I would find, obviously I'm not musical at all, so this probably has some bearing on sort of the thoughts going through my head. I would find it quite nerve-wracking performing in front of people. Did that come up for you, or were you just so into the music?
That's a great question. And I bet my answer is going to kind of tie into what we'll talk about soon.
Yeah.
With that whole uncertainty piece of things. So yes, absolutely. There were the, butterflies in your tummy kind of thing. I remember going out for my senior recital in college and being so nervous, and all you can do is just breathe and focus on the music to get, for me anyway, to get through that. So I think that's, I was nervous.
Yeah. I guess in some way, when we have to perform at a young age, and this is a question really or a thought, I'm wondering whether it helps us as we go through college and work and so forth, and presentations at work, or they could be internal presentations. And I wonder whether it helps with, because it probably potentially it lays some foundations at an earlier age.
I think absolutely it does. And what happens is that, everyone around us, when we're little, everyone around us is really shaping the neural chemistry, not chemistry so much, but the neural circuitry within our brains that help us navigate and help us make normal of certain things. So if I had to do a lot of music performances, which I did from the time I was in junior high, if that became sort of a normal thing, it doesn't mean that the butterflies didn't go away. But now my body and my brain had an understanding of what was going to happen. Here's how much you have to practice. Here's what's going to happen when you're in front of the judges. Here's what happens when you get a command performance. This is how you're going to feel when you're stepping onto stage. And when you repeat that over and over and over again, then the next time you step on stage, you have a pretty good prediction of what's going to happen based on how much you rehearsed, based on how that has gone. That doesn't mean that you can't get out there and kind of freeze or make some mistakes or something like that. But after a while, you make the mistakes and you keep going. And then your brain says, okay, I got through that. This is what I might do differently next time. And then you do it differently next time. So you have such a big neural network of I have done this, that it doesn't necessarily have to be quite as scary. It doesn't mean that it won't be, but
okay, that totally makes sense. And I've got one more music question, if I may. So the music and therapy. What's the therapy element to the music that you study in?
So different music therapists go into different niches. When I graduated college, I had to do some internship work, and I got an exposure to inpatient children work. I got inpatient adult psychiatric, outpatient psychiatric, outpatient mental health kinds of things. And so you can be in different environments, and it can be anything from just like art therapy. If you let someone and draw. Well, you can do the same thing with created music activities together in a small group. You can do one-on-one sorts of things where there's music. And what's happening, to the best of my recollection, I haven't done music therapy in decades now, but what's happening is that a different part of your brain is getting engaged in that space. And it's getting out of this sort of analytical, rigorous thinking process. And once we get out of that, we can get into a different space, and a space that allows us to create. And it's so fascinating what happens when we're starting to be able to create something. Our self-efficacy, our creativity, our capacity to choose, our capacity to control, our capacity to do something new really gets tapped. And that is essential for any sort of reframing of stories about what happened to us in trauma, what happened to us in the past, whether it was traumatic or not. So it's a really fascinating discipline that
sounds really fascinating, because it kind of leans into this podcast a bit, and some of what we're going to cover, I think, about that ability to reframe and not get so, I guess, focused on maybe the difficult moments that clearly we encounter as we navigate from childhood to college to uni to work, and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get to that, I was keen to get an understanding how you go from living in a small town in California on a farm, go to college, and then I guess somewhere along the lines, coaching comes into play. But when did coaching come into play? What was the sort of the trajectory to that point?
Yeah. So I am trying to think here. All right. So I did my work as a music therapist for a time, and I was living in another state then. I was in Texas. And so I'd kind of spread my wings and, gotten a little bit farther away from the small farm town. and I was in Dallas, and that was about the era, I will age myself here, that Ronald Reagan had come into office, and
Okay.
there were so many social programs that were getting cut at the time. And I had all of these friends who were in music therapy and much more experienced than I was, and they were getting laid off. And I was kind of reading the writing on the
Yeah.
wall, and I'm like, this is maybe not the most secure profession for me. So I came back to California. Long story short, I ended up opening up a resume and secretarial service. And that's where I learned, I'd always had good writing skills and English skills. I learned how to write resumes, and I was really good at it. And I had books on Barnes and Noble shelves, and, just had done a good job with that. And I do like to tell this story because it was one of those turning points that everybody has somewhere in their careers. And it was a period where I had several clients come back to me 2 or 3 years later after having written their resume. And the story was, Susan, I love that resume that you wrote for me. I got my job so easily, but I hate it. I hate my job. And then somebody else, another client, like within another week, same exact story. Got the job, love the resume, hate my job. And so that was about the era that professional coaching was starting to come online. It was the late 90s. And I learned about coaching. I heard about it. I had a friend who'd taken some classes. We happened to be at a little mini conference that we were putting on and rooming together. And I kept her up until like 2 a.m. asking her questions about coaching. And I came home from the conference. I enrolled in this little teleseminar class to get a feel for it. And I just felt like, oh my God, I was put on the planet to do this, just the
I
excitement,
love this.
energy, right? And I figured it would probably help those resumes that I was writing, because instead of getting the horse and, cart in front of the horse kind of thing, I could really stop and find out what makes you special. What do you love? What's energizing as a career professional? What is energizing for you to do? What's the gift that you have? What's the value that you bring to people? What kind of lifestyle do you want to have that's going to mesh with your career? Once I got those questions, those curiosity questions in front of the resume, it was a big, big shift.
Yeah. So I just want to a footnote to anybody that I guess is of a certain vintage won't realize how difficult it was creating CVs, because obviously, at the start we didn't have computers, probably, by hand. And so I wish I knew you in those days, because it's so difficult to actually create your CV, a CV that is compelling, that is you, and actually is good enough to actually put in front. Because in those days, we'd post it, you'd kind of like put it together, post it in the letterbox, and then the prospective employee would get it, and then hopefully at some point we would get a response. But I can't remember if it was a phone call or a letter back.
Yeah.
And then the process would, I guess, proceed from there. So yes, I wish I knew you back in those days. That would have been very beneficial. And also, I wanted to elaborate around. I love the idea of what you were doing, helping people really lean into what are their passions, what really motivates them. So that's the sort of career they can go for. Because I think it's very easy to find ourselves maybe going with what parents want us to do, or maybe what our friends want us to do, just because we don't have that capacity to really to lean inward and really think about, that's really what, or really think about that. It really ask yourself those questions.
So you're right. The passions, what you're leaning into. And I think the other big piece of that is, what is the story that you're writing about yourself? What's the self-identity that your family of origin, family, close friends have sort of helped stamp into you? And what are the limitations associated with that as well? And if there are limitations in your beliefs about, let's say me, I'm a small town farm girl from Firebaugh, California. And what right do I have to be some sort of global voice for coaching and change? It's just interesting to think about what do we stamp into us, internalize in us, not even consciously aware that we've written that story.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating still today. We create stories that become almost embedded in how we position ourselves in the marketplace, or I guess for this perspective in the marketplace, and without working with somebody like you to actually get us to really think about those limitations that we potentially put on ourselves and get us to challenge them and to really coax out of us the potential of what we can do. Because sometimes the potential of what we can do, if we don't have conversations with someone like you, it potentially will never come to the surface, because we just can, in your example, you might consider ourselves as somebody that, had a good life on a farm, but it maybe you don't think beyond that.
Yeah. And I think it ties into this whole topic about uncertainty. Because let's say from an identity perspective, if I have my story that's, really well ingrained that says I can do this, but not that. And yet if maybe there's something stirring in me that wants to do that, but there's a gap, and that gap is really an uncertainty gap. And our brain starts predicting, can I be successful at that? Do I have the skills within me to do that? Do I have the external resources to do that? If I've never done that, then that uncertainty gap can feel really big. And then our brain starts making up stories about whether I can do it or I can't do it. And oftentimes the I can or can't is not truly reflective. We don't spend a lot of time really reflecting on, where did I get that story? Where did I get that sense that I can't do that? And so I think then we can get ourselves into an anxious state, a nervous state, a negative state, because the brain's taken over and just said, nope, can't do it.
So what was it like at the start of this journey where you decided, these people kept on coming back to you and saying, look, CV amazing, but I've definitely, the job that I've got is definitely something that I don't want to do. Then you realize actually there's something here.
Yeah.
What was it like in the early days where you came up with the coaching and you were seeing, you were coaxing out of your clients the potential of who they could be in a marketplace, as opposed to, where they position their identity?
Yeah. I love that question. Thank you. I think there was a time period between, hey, you wrote a great resume, CV, and I hate my job. And then I discover coaching and I start immediately. I'm just a learning junkie. So I immediately enroll in a coach training class. And literally, I was like a couple of weeks in, maybe 4-6 weeks in, and I decided that I was going to start a career coach training school, because this was back in the, barely 2000s, and there wasn't much out there around career. And I'd had such a successful career in that career job search space. So I was very involved in a resume writing association at that time. And so here I am, barely into my coach training. And I write up an outline for a career coach training program. I rent a little exhibit table at the national conference, and I come home with several seats sold for my very first career.
Oh, amazing. That's amazing. I want to do you high five, even though it was some years ago. That's amazing.
Right. Yeah. But I was scared to death. I was like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And I didn't, again, the uncertainty. I didn't know if I was going to be successful. I didn't even know if I was going to like it. And in fact, into it, I was doing all of this teleseminar training, because, that was the way that people started training in the early 2000s. And I talked to my mentor, and thank heavens I had this beautiful master certified coach mentor who helped me with my curriculum and made sure that I was on the straight and narrow with coaching and that sort of thing. But I said to her, I don't like what I'm doing. And I feel stuck, because now I've got these students and I've got this curriculum and I've got this career coach academy, and what am I going to do? And I found out that what the part of it that I didn't like was that I didn't feel like I was connected closely enough with people in that learning training process. And I figured out ways over the years to massage that. But that was a real scary spot for me to be, 9 months into this new business. And I thought, oh, there's this piece that I'm not excited about. I love the one-on-one mentoring the most. And then once Zoom kind of came into the picture, and I even kind of drug my heels at that. But once that was part of it, then there was eye contact and there was a little more connection. So, you have to tweak things as you go and you learn and you iterate. But I was scared. But I also feel like one of my core principles for making a big decision is that if it scares me and I'm really excited, that's kind of an interesting combination for me to pay attention to. So
Yeah.
I'm scared of stuff. I don't want to skydive. I'm scared of skydiving. But if I'm excited about something and scared at the same time, then that usually tells me take a step forward and explore it.
Yeah. Got so many thoughts in my head. Immediately what comes to mind was because what's interesting for me, when we do something, particularly when it's new, and it's like a puzzle, not every piece of the puzzle's going together. And in your case, it was the one bit where you said, well, something doesn't feel quite right. How did you go about identifying what that was? The reason I asked the question is because there's probably people that are watching now. Maybe they're in a similar position. Maybe they've started something new. It could be a new job. It could be they're starting their own business, but maybe something doesn't feel quite right. Is there a process that they can maybe adopt to try and work out what that is?
Work with a good coach.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I say
your
that
details will be on the show notes, so people can contact you.
Yeah, lots of places and people that we've trained are awesome. Yeah. In all seriousness, I think somebody who you can bounce ideas with to first off understand, what am I actually feeling about this? Is it, what is the sensation that I'm feeling? And then what is the story that I associate with that sensation? Because as you know, I'm just fascinated by the brain and neuroscience and how sex. And so what happens when we have some sort of an emotion or a feeling, and they are two different things, but once we have that kind of sensation of butterflies in my stomach, or I'm, tense in my shoulders, or whatever it might be, it's time for me to teach another class. And why is it I don't want to go and pick up the phone to teach that class? If I can stop and talk through with somebody, what am I feeling? And then what is it what's the story I've got going around that? If you can unearth the stories that are oftentimes unconscious based on past experiences that are now being interacted with your current experience, and just tease those apart and see, what are the predictions I'm making why I'm not going to like this? What is the story that's happening? And for me, the story from a very transparent piece was, I was afraid people weren't going to like me. I was afraid that I couldn't get enough feedback from people to know if I was relevant and on track. And that was a very subtle piece that I could not have seen immediately without having had my coach kind of dance through that a little bit together, very non-judgmentally, very compassionately, very curiously. So I think that's, if you're looking for a process, it would be pay attention to what you're feeling and be very curious about, where is that coming from? And I'm not saying go back into psychotherapy and analyze where you were rejected by somebody as a child or something, but there is usually something behind us that the brain holds on to help us predict how we're going to be successful in the future. So once you find what's happening there, then you can start thinking about, all right, what are the choices that I can experiment with? And that's what I love about coaching, is that it just gives people the greater capacity to choose and to tap into their autonomy, their efficacy, their ability to create things and experiment with things. And so one of my favorite sayings that I learned from somebody I did some flow training with one time, Jamie Will, and he said, find a recoverable experiment that you can work with. So, if you're going to stretch and learn something new and reduce that unpredictability, uncertainty, then you do it in a safe place to start. So for me, I actually lowered the number of people that I could have in my classes so I could feel a greater connection. That was one way that I could control that dial just a little bit. And there are other things, but start safe. If you're going to ask yourself to do something new and major in terms of changing behavior, don't go out and, do it on a big stage. Start small,
Yeah.
experiment with it safely, and then take that feedback and iterate and figure out what you're going to do differently. And after a while, now you have retrained your brain to have new neural connections that say, when I get into a space where I don't know people and I want to have a connection, I know that I'm going to be prone to hoping they'll really like me and, me on the head and that sort of thing. And I don't want to be that way. I want to be in a space where I'm there for them to make them be curious about their own behaviors and not make it about me. So, like, that was my big learning through that tough period. And I think I'm still learning it.
Yeah, I think we're always learning, which I think is a good thing. I think it's a blessing to always to be able to upgrade ourselves at whatever stage we're at in life.
If there are any facts that we can say for sure are true in life, it is that we have to keep growing to be able to thrive, to not stagnate, to keep having new neural connections involved. In fact, there's a part of the brain, the mid-cingulate gyrus and post-anterior mid-cingulate gyrus. I'll have to come back to you on that one, but I think it doesn't matter. That part of the brain has been noted by superagers to those people as they get into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and they're continually stretching themselves to do things that are hard, not fun necessarily always, but it might be interesting, but something that really feels like a stretch for them. That part of the brain says, oh, I can't shut down this body yet because I still have things to learn. So if we're not learning, you're sort of on the downhill slope there.
I love that. I love that idea of continuous learning. And I love it because I remember when I finished university, I thought I was almost like, I'm done. It's almost like I put my slippers on and I'm done. And I don't have to think about learning. And I realized I can't get those years back where I had that was my attitude. And yeah, it's just misguided. And I guess they say you can't cry over spilt milk, something like that. But I do wish those times of where I not did down tools, but I just thought, okay, I've done a university, I don't have to study anymore. But I realised learning all the time, and meeting people like you, the gift of knowledge, the gift of developing is really it energizes you when you learn. So what I wanted to ask, I want to get into the neuroscience, and then I wanted to get into how we can better, particularly from a career perspective, navigate the challenging moment that we experience in careers and so forth. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask you a little bit around when you started doing the coaching in those early years, but when the people started coming back to you, and then you were able to coach them and support them and really help them understand a lot more about who they are and their identities. What was that like for you personally to be able to help people really make that shift and realize and have a clearer understanding of who they are and their potential?
Probably life-changing,
Pretty big.
Right. A lot of people talk about purpose and having purpose. And I felt like in that sort of framework that I had found my purpose. Like, this is what I was put on the planet to do, right? Boom. I also am curious about that frame of purpose. I wonder if it's just not that I had learned something new that gave me an incredible rush of, those quote happy neurochemicals of like dopamine and oxytocin and some of those things that cause you to actually feel good. So I felt good when I got to do this thing called coaching. And I saw that other people felt good when they got to experience this thing called coaching. And so that reciprocal nature of that relationship was just, I think, reinforcing. And it also helped me as a great introvert. I'm very introverted. It also helped me see the beauty and the importance and the relevance of doing things that connect with other people in this world. And so it was a lot of things that really fed into why coaching was just going to be such a core passion for me for decades to come.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Love that. I love the way that you're able to support and help people really find their lane, because that, just from my experience and the people that I've been around, not just personally, but from things that I see online and so forth, it's so needed still to this day. People have, I guess, career fog, life fog, and it's difficult to unwrap what where it's gone wrong, where is the confusion, and how do I actually navigate beyond that. So neuroscience came into play. Maybe you can give us an idea about how neuroscience came into the play and how that meshes or blends with the coaching that you provide for your clients and
Sure.
coaches.
Sure. For me, I really got interested in neuroscience a good 10 years ago, and wasn't the first, certainly, who was exploring neuroscience around coaching. There were other thought leaders, but at the same time, the whole science community, apart from coaching, was really understanding so much more about the brain. And back in the days of, I can think like the 60s, when they started looking at nutrition and decided that, okay, hey, if you get a bunch of really high fat foods, it's not good for your heart, and it's not good for you if you're smoking and doing that and all of those things. And I think neuroscience sort of had a similar coming of age in the 90s, where the research really started to help us understand what happens to that prefrontal cortex when it's awash or overloaded or tsunamied with too much cortisol or too much adrenaline or even too much dopamine. So many times we think dopamine is this happy chemical, but it's an anticipatory chemical where we anticipate something's going to happen. And if you're anticipating too much scary stuff happening, then the sensitivity of our prefrontal cortex at that point really shuts down. They talk about like working memory that's available when you're in that kind of amped up fight flight state. And I was thinking about, how do I explain this? And I have this next to my desk here. This is like a little pad, right? I don't have anything on it. You need to read it. But this is what the availability of working memory that you have when you're not awashed and over tsunamied with cortisol. This is the amount of working memory space that you have when you do get in that red zone state of fight flight. So that's a big difference in what the brain can handle and take care of. And so as I discovered more about neuroscience and some of these things that we were understanding, I thought to myself, well, how does that relate to coaching? And that's when I just really wanted to dig in and understand what can a coach do to be able to be with somebody when they're in that sort of tsunami red zone state, to be able to make choices that normally they wouldn't, to not be so reactive, but to be more reflective and to be curious about, what is my brain really predicting? Do I believe that prediction? Can I have a different prediction about this scenario and this uncertainty that's in front of me? So 10 years, I've just, for fun, I will read PubMed articles on neuroscience at night just because I'm interested in it. So it's taken it a lot further there, but yeah.
Okay. And with the neuroscience blended in, is that, and when you're working with, I guess, coaches that you coach, and I guess as you navigate to your clients, are you so is the premise the ability to help your clients make, it's almost like open up the canvas, so they're making decisions which are more in line with themselves, as opposed to, maybe, I'm not explaining this very well, by the way, but making decisions that when they're not in their maybe more organic state where it's actually them. I haven't explained that very well, so I'm hoping you can pick through the bones.
I'm kind of getting the gist of it, I think. It's like, yeah. And can I say, so I do coach. The main thing that I do is train coaches. And So it's interesting. You're kind of asking, like, how does the coach help the client when they might be in that fight, flight, red zone state, to be able to be in a place where they can make more strategic and long-term
Yeah.
decisions. The interesting thing, Paul, is that if the coach can't get themselves into that state, into that sort of co-regulated state where they can feel maybe the cortisol, kind of rushing over you. When you have a client that's very red zone, it's very normal to also feel and experience something similar. And the big question is, how does the coach get into what I call the blue zone of a parasympathetic nervous system, where I can slow down my heart rate, slow down my breathing, so that I can restore as much capacity to my prefrontal cortex, so that I can be with that person and not try to convince them not to get all wigged out, not try to tell them to think about it differently, not try to just jump into reframing, not try to jump into an over Pollyanna kind of scenario with things. But if I can just be there and be with the discomfort that my client has, that's the big thing that coaches, if you can't have that state first as a coach, then you're not going to be able to support your client at all. So it starts here.
Okay. Got you. I hadn't thought about that. So it's important that the coach is able to regulate themselves so they're in the right state to be able to really coach their clients.
And co-regulate that state.
Okay. Fabulous. So,
and can I just add, and to do it in a way that doesn't sound like you're judging the client for where they are, that doesn't want them to immediately fix it and, think differently. I mean, it's a true gift and a masterful skill to be able to be with somebody that's in discomfort and connect with them over that, but not internalize it yourself. But instead just be able to kind of diffuse all of that emotion simply because you are able to face it with them. And once you have that facing it with them, something shifts in both them and I think also us as the coach. And from that state, then they are and only in that state are they then going to be open to new ways of looking at things, because that's why they're in that state to begin with. The uncertainty says, I don't have an answer for what to do with this problem.
Okay. And this is fascinating, by the way. And immediately what I'm thinking, so say if you're a coach and you are working with a client, could it be over? I know that, so when you coach somebody, obviously it's over a period of time, it's not just one session. So in order to get to the point where with the client, you're in that sort of I forget the term that you use,
Co-regulated.
Yeah, co-regulated state. So might that take a couple of sessions before you as a coach, you recognize that you're in that sort of space?
Yeah. I did my master's thesis research on this very topic. I took both new coaches and very experienced coaches and asked them about what happens when you have a client that's in that, intense emotional state. And whether it was a first session or a third session, oftentimes in a first session, it can be harder to stay regulated.
Yeah.
And so then the stories that start happening within ourselves as a coach while we're having that conversation, shame, avoidance, like how soon before the session's over, I'm looking at the clock, or I did that wrong, or I should have asked a different question, or I'm not handling this well. All that kind of internal chatter that can be going on is actually very normal. And again, it was seen in even more experienced coaches. So it's so much easier said than done to be able to stay in that regulated state as a coach.
Okay, lovely. Question around, so we live in challenging times today. My perfect failure is the direct result of challenging times. And I think increasingly today, I think it's more and more, I don't know whether it's more and more, maybe it's just a perception I have, but clearly, I guess we've got more access to different platforms like LinkedIn and different platforms like Instagram and various platforms where we hear about challenges and so forth. So do you have any kind of advice, any tools that people can use to help them be more perceptive and navigate the difficult experiences or times that they might be experiencing, particularly from a career perspective? Big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. I just had conversations with some coaches whose entire business model is based around DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging.
Oh, wow.
And as you know, I'm based in the US, and that is really changing and so it's really impacting people's business. I talk about uncertainty and scariness. So I don't want to minimize the truth that these can be very emotionally intense feelings for people. So back to your question about advice, I would say be as self-protective as possible. And what I mean by that is to limit the amount of information that you have coming in around the uncertainty. And it's a little bit of an irony, Paul, because when uncertainty happens, one of the things that you want to do is go out and get some more information so that you can have pieces of the puzzle to be able to put it together. But the problem is if you keep getting too much information, and that information also has, kind of waves of uncertainty around it, you're just expanding the amount of uncertainty that your brain has to work with. And this little, scratch pad is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you really have to kind of remove yourself from places that are going to be more uncertainty. Social media is one of those places where that can really exacerbate the uncertainty. So I would say be really careful. Find your bone marrow buddies. So a bone marrow buddy is somebody that's, really going to inject the most life-giving force into you possible. That could be a coach. It could be a deep friend who believes in you and champions you. Limit that. And you still have to go out and let's say that, your business has changed and now you have to figure out kind of a different way to make a living. You still have to go out and knock on doors, but do it in a way that also has enough contact back with those people and those resources that are going to feed you and nourish you and remind you of what you need yourself to be your best. And oftentimes that means you're going to have to change your patterns, which is difficult in uncertainty. So got to be kind of a blend. I wish I had a perfect answer for this, but it really is training the brain. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. That's pretty perfect to me. I'm conscious of your time, so I just want to rattle through. We've got 4 minutes. I just want to rattle few of your questions, if I may. So the Academy. So could you maybe give us an overview of what the Academy is and how people can find out a little bit more about Academies?
Absolutely. So the Academies is a professional coach training organization that specializes in leadership and career coach training certifications. We are authorized by the International Coaching Federation as what they call a level 1 or level 2 program that helps somebody to go and get an ICF credential through our training. And we love embedding the neuroscience around that and really focusing in on leadership conversations and career conversations for coaches that want to work in that space with executives and leaders or people doing career change. So that's can be found at theacademies.com.
Amazing. So I will put that in a show note. So if people is that potentially the best place to reach you? Are there any other platforms where people can reach you, or is that the best one?
LinkedIn is a good space as well. So the Academies on LinkedIn, and then my personal would be Coach Susan Britton.
Okay, lovely. Okay, get the links. They're going to be in the show notes for everybody. And I think this is the last question, and this is the recurring question. So if you could invite 3 inspirational people for dinner, they can be alive or past, who might you invite?
So I gave that a little thought. Thank you for the heads up that was coming. And my 3 people, 2 I think are going to be maybe a little more known. The first one would be Einstein. And I'm sure a lot of people would say that, but why? He had this deep interest in both the philosophical and the spiritual implications of science. And so had such an ability to see the bigger picture. Carl Jung would be my second one. he could see like the invisible, the collective unconscious, the persona and shadow, the symbolism, and that process of individuation. And so, here you've got Einstein that can see the bigger picture, Jung that can see the invisible. And then one of my favorite neuroscientists is Lisa Feldman Barrett from Northeastern and Harvard Medical School. And her research has really turned a lot of these neuroscience myths on their head. And golly, if I could just sit down with them and I would ask them, what do you want to ask each other about these things that you know? So, and then I would just sit there and beam.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So thank you for sending me. You kindly sent me a video of Lisa on Huberman.
Yes.
And so I haven't finished watching it, but like when you watch when I was working and listening, and then I was just watching and listening because it was just it's such a fascinating interview. I might put it on the show notes as well so other people can watch it as well. But that was brilliant. I wasn't aware of her, so thank you so much for sharing that link with me. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. Paul, thank you so much. I just so acknowledge and appreciate what you've done with My Perfect Failure and how you can normalize what the world sometimes calls failure and leaning into learning in the midst of that so that our brain can be as healthy as possible.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you for the work you're doing. And I'm delighted that I've met you, Dominique. Thank you so much, and hopefully this will not be the last conversation we have. I'd love to have many more conversations with you. So thanks for your time today, Susan.
Absolutely, you as well.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of My Perfect Failure. We're always looking to improve the show, so keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things that you don't like. You can find me at Paul at myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the contact page on the website. And lastly, if you're watching on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button. It's a great way for us to grow the channel. So until the next time, take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.